Hey friends, welcome to the channel. So here's another interesting story of DEKU. What if DEKU had Supernova space-bending Quirk? I give full credits to authors in the starting of the video. If you want to see more stuff like this, then please subscribe to the channel and also do check the talented author of this captivating story. The Space Hero. Supernova by Cupid's Rose. Please search it on Google. So let's begin. The start of a new school year is meant to be an exciting time. The phrase, "supposed to be exciting," is the main idea of that statement. When living with the patriarch of the Sinazaka family adds an extra layer of tension, how exciting and pleasant can a new school year possibly be? Under his charming old man exterior, the Sinazaka head, Hachiro, is an older gentleman in his late 70s who harbors the mindset of a domineering and cunning patriarch. The main character of the novel, Hanako, must adhere to stringent household rules and a demanding daily training schedule in order to win over her family's patriarch, Hachiro. After all, the intensity of her grandfather's covert objective is far greater than any school, not even one geared towards producing future superheroes. Reika. She's beautiful. Look at that beautiful blonde hair. Just like her silly old dad. Reika looked her husband mischievously and said, "She does look quite a bit like you. And yet she managed to still turn out to be a lil cutie. Shocking, considering where she apparently gets her looks." "Hey now. That's just plain rude," Masaomi said with a silly smile before bending to give his new daughter a forehead kiss. He thought she was incredible. The sun in his world had returned to Earth as a small, simple baby. He merely hoped that he and his wife would live long enough to witness her extraordinary accomplishments as a grown woman. He knew deep down that she would do great things. After all, being a pro-hero came with risks. Her name should be Hanako, written with the kanji for shine. Reika. I don't know. Hanako is a pretty powerful name to live up to. Do you honestly want to put the pressure on our sweet little princess to shine? What if she was born quirkless? We obviously won't know for sure until she turns 4 years old, but what if she is? Reika grinned and lifted her gaze from her husband to her newborn daughter's face, saying, "Masa-kun. Breathe." She gestured to her daughter's gently fluttering eyelids as they spoke, saying, "Hanako Sinazaka will do amazing things. We don't have to worry about her shining, because she will do so on her own. Look." Masaomi observed the irises of her eyes, which were a dazzling yellow-orange color that gave the impression of sparkle even in the absence of light, and realized what his wife was talking about. They resembled the sun on a brilliant summer day or stars on a cloudy night. They were astounding. Hanako Sinazaka would achieve incredible feats. She'll look radiant. Hanako Sinazaka stood at the foot of her bed staring down at her new school uniform while covered only in a towel with her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. At the beginning of last week, she had received her acceptance letter, which she had thought would arrive whether or not she had applied to the school because of her grandfather's persistence. At first, she had been content, but when her grandfather learned that she had been accepted into the hero track, Class 1A, everything changed. He was so happy that he concluded Hanako would benefit from increasing her training schedule by twofold. He gave her a determined look and said, "It will give you an edge, girl. You will double your routine starting tonight. You will also study harder with these books on hero tactics and battle strategies. There is no doubt in my mind that the next top of the academy graduate will be a Sinazaka. Anything less would be truly unacceptable." "Yes, of course, grandfather. That sounds appropriate." With a heavy sigh, she let the towel in her favorite color, yellow, fall to the ground. Hanako stared in the long mirror that hung on the back of her door before gathering her things to get ready for the day. She trailed her sparkling light amber eyes down her face, then her neck, until they rested on a starburst-shaped scar on her right shoulder. She did this while running her right index finger along a scar that runs from just beneath her left breast to the top of her right hip. Her eyes glowed a bright yellow as she remembered that fateful night, 5 years ago, when everything in her life changed, though it was still unclear if it was for the better or worse. A breaking news story about 2 pro-heroes, Stargirl and Sunslayer, who were brutally slain on the live program, was carried by the local news channel 5 years ago. After witnessing her parents' deaths on live television, The daughter of the two pro-heroes was placed in police care and left orphaned as word got out about the tragedy that had occurred hours earlier. It took 26 hours and 18 minutes for the parentless child to be claimed by someone. Hanako Shinozaka's estranged grandfather Hachiro was the one who made the assertion. Glancing down at her reflection, Hanako realized that she had somehow managed to get dressed for the day while lost in her thoughts. She gave herself a quick touch to make sure she had worn her specially tailored pants in case she needed it on her first day. She looked at herself in the glass once more, letting her distinctive eyes wander over her entire appearance in her new school uniform as she stroked her thumb over the lapel of her overcoat. UA. My parents met in high school, fell in love, and eventually gave birth to me. Regretfully, they didn't survive to the finish. UA in Japan nowadays, high school is regarded as the most esteemed hero academy. Many of the top 10 pro-heroes in the world today attended its schools. The goal of any pro-hero is to get into the United States Academy. Hannah looked at the digital clock on her bedside table and saw that it was 7:45 a.m. She wanted to arrive a little early so she could get a feel for the school and see her classmates before the required initial contacts. School started at 8:30. After all, it was the first day of school for all of her classmates. Hanako went down the stairs and out of her bedroom without further hesitation. Her grandfather was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, and she gave him a fleeting glance before going into the entryway to put on her outdoor shoes. Before leaving her small mansion, she slipped her school shoes and a few notes into her rucksack and threw it over her shoulder. As she strolled along the pavement, she noticed with a beautiful smile that her best friend, Momo Yaoyorozu, appeared to be thinking the same thing this morning regarding arriving early for their first day of school. She moved towards her friend almost without thinking, and they briefly chatted about their weekends, with Hanako tactfully omitting to mention how hard Hachiro had been exercising her during their required double sessions. Momo beamingly smiled at her friend. Aren't you just so excited to start our first year at U? In a few years, we'll be pro-heroes, Hana-chan, with an expression of unadulterated joy in her eyes. Despite her stomach churning at the thought of attending the same school as her, in her opinion, legendary parents, Hanako couldn't help but grin back at her. Having only spent her own life with them for 10 years, she had never really known them. It seemed like only a few seconds had passed since the August 2nd event, her 10th birthday. Her parents were teaching her how to manage the various facets of her peculiarity, which she had just recently begun to explore. Only a few weeks after turning 15, which also happened to be the 5th anniversary of their tragic, widely publicized deaths, Hanako was now strolling to her new high school with her closest friend. She smirked mischievously at her buddy, allowing a glimmer of real joy to cut through her nervousness. Of course I'm excited, Momo-chan. I hope we make lots of friends on our first day, she said. It was impossible for Hanako to hide her excitement at the prospect of seeing who else would be enrolled in the hero course with her. Would their homes be comparable? Could they really comprehend what she has been going through for the past 5 years? As they strolled to their new high school, Yaoyorozu and Shinozaka carried on their idle conversation. Both pupils arrived at the UA in less than 30 minutes. They arrived at their new classroom on campus. Momo stopped walking and turned to face Hanako, her modest face displaying confusion. Hana-chan, do you truly think we can become friends? In response to her best friend's inquiry, will they be able to make any friends at this new school? Hanako bit her lip and thought about it for a few seconds before a pleasant grin came to her lips. Indeed. Momo-chan, hurry up, we can't keep them waiting all day. Momo took Hanako's left hand and said, You're correct. You glance at her buddy with anxious eyes that eventually become determined. Let's stop wasting time now. When the two childhood friends walked into the classroom together, a few other students looked up and acknowledged them. In all, there were 5 students. A girl with pink skin and 2 small horns on top of her equally pink hair, who watched over her 2 new female classmates with an eager eye. A boy with 2 toned hair, one side white and the other a brilliant fire engine red. 2 other boys, one with explosively styled blonde hair and burning crimson eyes, and another with a bird-like face and composed demeanor. And a girl with dark, hunter green hair, who sat near the back and had dark, hunter green hair, who looked like a frog despite her appearance. Hello. Meeting more of the gals in this class is quite pleasant. My name is Mina Ishido, and Acid is my quirk. Good to meet you. With a smile on her face, the girl with pink skin greeted Momo and Hanako individually, shaking her hand and exchanging names. My peculiarity is creativity, and my name is Momo Yayorozu. I concur that meeting another girl in Class 1A is a pleasant experience. Senizaka Hanako. It's good to meet you. Typical. Hanako was always filled with a deep sense of dread when she talked about her quirk. In fact, she tried to avoid showing off and talking about it whenever she could. Her father used to pick her up and put her on his left knee, telling her all the wonderful things he knew she would accomplish in the future, but she knew better. Hanako had a strange and explosive quirk that, if unchecked, might devour everyone and everything in its path. Hanako Senizaka's quirk is Star Blast. She can produce explosive star blasts with any part of her body, and she can even use them to temporarily shield herself or others from harm. However, if she loses practiced control, she can easily lose control, which could have disastrous consequences for everyone and everything in her immediate vicinity. She desired total control over her peculiarity, something she has been chasing since that day, and this was the main reason she even considered applying to UA High School, even though she knew it was ultimately a non-negotiable. TCH. She was about to speak when she heard the door open and several more students started to filter in. Choosing to observe her new peers instead, Hanako fell silent and watched them all as they came in and took an empty seat, all the while pondering why Katsuki Bakugo looked completely unimpressed and undoubtedly agitated. Instead of saying anything, she walked confidently across the classroom and took the seat directly next to this boy, never breaking visual contact with his bright red eyes. They failed to notice the strange man curled up on the floor in a sleeping bag, which is obviously a sign that they are irrational and destined to fail out of his class. After a few awkward and unpleasant interactions and several minutes, a tall, dark, and rugged man emerged from a fluffy and yellow sleeping bag and announced that he is, in fact, their homeroom teacher, Professor Shota Aizawa. Put on these training attire. We are going to do an assessment of quirks. 10 minutes are allotted to you. In less than 10 minutes, all 21 of the students found themselves on the training grounds, suddenly unsure of what lay ahead. Aizawa left the room with those few words, heading to the training grounds while the students frantically searched for their customized gym uniforms and hurried off to change. Each of you recalls undergoing physical fitness tests during your prior academic careers. None of those required the use of your peculiarities. We will be performing the same thing as yesterday, but I want each and every one of you to give it your all, eccentricities and all. What was your best junior high softball throw, Bakugo? I don't know, probably around 60 meters. All right. Come on out and put forth your best effort now. Make use of your unique talent to toss the baseball farther than you've ever done. TCH. Bakugo strode to the pitching mound inside the scoring circle, cupped the ball between both hands, and then reeled his right arm back, ball in palm, shooting his arm forward and unleashing the ball with a powerful and explosive blast of his quirk. The softball went soaring and scored over 700 meters. While most of the class stared in disbelief at the measurement taken on Professor Aizawa's special device, Hanako just stared at Katsuki's right hand, noting the soft tendrils of smoke drifting off of his skin, the only indication that he had used his explosive quirk. She then turned her gaze down to her own hands, watching as they clenched into loose fists. I'm going to control this. When I'm done, all that will be coming off of my skin is smoke. Aizawa gave his classmates a quick glance and grinned wickedly, saying, "Oh." Additionally, the person with the lowest quirk assessment score will be expelled. Advice to follow. Don't be shy. The students did admirably, once they got over the initial shock of hearing Aizawa-sensei's powerful statement about their possible expulsion. Senizaka, on the other hand, watched idly as her classmates worked with her on task after task, showing off their quirks when it would suit them best. She tried to use her quirk sparingly, though, not wanting them all to know what she could do just yet. Hanako felt a sudden unease, the kind that only comes from having your every move scrutinized. She smirked and silently shook her head as she carried on with the tasks, exerting only the minimum amount of effort required at any given moment, realizing that multiple pairs of eyes were observing her with curiosity and probably trying to determine what she was capable of. The softball throw was the last exercise. As one student after another stepped up to the pitching mound and gave it their all, it was Hanako Sanozaka's turn. Bakugo used his explosive quirk again, Uraraka made her softball float off into infinity, and Momo used her creation quirk to blast the softball into the sky. She moved carefully up to the pitching mound, taking a deep breath as she felt the gazes on her already. Professor Aizawa threw her a softball, which she caught easily, hastily cupping it between both hands as she closed her eyes. She's one of the kids who was in based on a recommendation, right? Yes, I think so. I'm eager to discover what she's truly capable of. Not all recommended pupils live up to expectations. Yes, exactly. It's clear that she is talented. How else could they suggest her? Cry. You're keeping Hana-chan distracted. Just watch if you're that inquisitive, Momo responded in a semi-angrily whisper. Gritting her teeth, Hanako squeezed her fist around the ball, trying to block out the hushed voices murmuring from the sidelines. With a final breath, Hanako pulled her right arm back slowly and bent into a semi-low side crouch. In seconds, she was shooting her upper body forward and her right arm and hand exploded in a bright white gold blast as the ball shot from her hand at an impossible speed. The ball felt hot in her hand, too hot. But it wasn't the ball. No, it was her quirk. She felt like she was burning up from the inside and she knew that her hands had started shaking in unconscious anticipation. Breathing heavily, she felt a warm trickle slide from her nose. Pulling away, she found a small trail of red, indicating a nosebleed. If you looked quickly enough, you could almost see the seams on the ball smoking, as well as the arm on Sanozaka smoking, as the entire right sleeve of her gym uniform had been incinerated instantly the second her quirk became activated. 901 meters. Hanako smiles a little, delicate smile, proud of herself, even if her body is still in a condition of mild shock from her power burst. Well done, Hana-chan. Momo gave her closest buddy an appreciative look, saying, I knew you could do it. Thank you. Re-entering the group, she places herself between her closest friend and a boy with rich blonde hair and a black streak running through his fringe, whom she recognizes as Denki Kaminari. Professor Aizawa announces that no one is actually being expelled today, praising their perseverance and expressing his hopes for them to perform better in the future. After his brief speech, he dismisses the class for the day, and Hana rushes inside to change back into her uniform so she can walk home. Hachiro will be very interested to hear how her first day went. The class is finishing up their quirk assessment test when, in an unexpected twist, Izuku Midoriya breaks his finger during a softball throw. Congrats! It's dinner time now. On your birthday, I placed an order for your favorite takeaway. Little one, come eat so we can get you ready for bed. Looking up from her seat in the living room, Hanako saw that the news was on television, though neither she nor her current guardian was watching much of it. She had been sitting on the couch, sketching in her new notebook. A present from her mother, while the news was on. Her parents had departed several hours ago to begin their night of hero work, after countless excuses about being called out on her 10th birthday. Her uncle, Eiichi, had been left in charge of looking after his favorite and only niece. I'll arrive there right now, kun. I'm almost finished with my picture. There was a slight gasp from behind her and she looked up at her uncle's troubled face. Then she heard a quiet chuckle from the kitchen and something that sounded suspiciously exactly like her mother, before footsteps entered the living room. Breaking news. Pro Heroes Star Girl and Sunslayer on site of horrible villain attack in downtown Tokyo. With a swift movement of her head, Hanako focused her gaze on the TV screen. The villain was in front of her parents. Her father, Masaomi, was standing gaunt in front of her as her guard, while her mother, Reika, was bleeding heavily from what appeared to be several stab wounds. Mom. Hello. kun. Mom is gushing blood. Will she be alright? Little one, I'm confident she'll be alright. Eiichi offered her a hopeful grin and said, your mom is resilient and Masaomi won't let anything happen to her. When she turned back to the TV, he bit his lip a little and prayed in silence that things would work out for his niece. With a diabolical sneer, the villain burst out laughing, sounding like they were excited. Meat. A lot of flesh. I require it. I need the meat right now. After those remarks, everything happened so fast that she and her uncle nearly missed it. Those words would haunt her dreams for a long time. Nearly. His wife started sobbing weakly on the ground, reaching out a hand in vain to her husband, and Hanako watched as her father was suddenly impaled by long white blades that seemed to come from the villain's mouth. Masaomi coughing up blood and then falling to the ground in a limp pile, blood oozing out onto the concrete around him. Reika's hand abruptly stopped reaching for Masaomi as a shadow fell over her body and she looked up, fear in her eyes as she was stabbed again, this time in her heart. Breaking news. Pro Heroes Star Girl and Sunslayer brutally murdered by wanted villain, Moonfish, in downtown Tokyo. Her eyes burned and tears started to run down her cheeks. It was as if her heart had stopped beating and she was suddenly out of breath. Mom, Papa, no, dear Uncle Eiichi. This is too good to be true. Please. Even though her uncle picked her up and held her in his arms to comfort her, she continued to cry uncontrollably. She nearly missed the fact that he was crying as well. Gasping for breath, Hanako shot up in her bed and started crying harder as she threw her arms around herself, hoping that the act would provide some comfort. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and when she raised her hand to her cheek, all she could feel was the wetness of the tears pouring down her face. It's been a long time since I had that dream. She cried herself back to sleep, but at 7 in the morning, her alarm went off, and she woke up groggily, stretching herself back out of bed and enjoying the sound of her tight joints popping and stretching, and then she sighed when she looked in the mirror on her door. Hanako proceeded to her bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, which didn't help much, and decided to take a shower in hopes of looking more, well, normal. Her eyes still appeared bloodshot after her late night, early morning sob fest. Preparing for his second day of school, Katsuki Bakugo stood in front of his own bathroom mirror, his toothbrush protruding from his mouth. Perish. Germs are such idiots, dickhead. Give up yelling at such an early hour. Chick. Foolish woman. While I brush my teeth. He shook his head, spitting out the last of the toothpaste into the sink before giving his mouth a quick wash with water. He was usually cranky first thing in the morning, but today he was particularly agitated. Why? His thoughts had been racing the majority of the night as he lay in bed, thinking about all of his classmates, their peculiarities, their strength, and her. Hanako Sinazaka was the first student to catch his attention when she entered Class 1A on the first day. There was something about her that piqued his interest and made him furious. Why in the world should he be interested in some dumb suggested kid who was just an extra? My life is being ruined by a stupid girl in my dumb class. She cannot defeat me. In the future, I'll be the top pro hero. Not by her. Not foolish, DEKU. Me, TCH. Having walked to school mostly alone herself this morning, Hanako was unpleasantly surprised to meet an unwelcome guest halfway to UA. He was certainly not what she had expected to cope with today. I'm still shocked that I was placed in Class 1B and you in Class 1A. It is obvious that this institution lacks reasoning when it comes to accepting deserving kids into the hero course. Hanako muttered, it feels like they knew exactly what they were doing. It appeared as though her friend, Tumatako-ji, had either decided to ignore her or had not heard her. What makes them think you belong in the top hero course? Simply said, female heroes are weaker than male heroes. Take a look at what transpired with your mom. Perhaps your father would still be alive and you wouldn't be some depressed little orphan if it weren't for her. Tisk. Hanako bit her tongue despite her clenched fists, knowing full well that he was merely trying to play her, as he always did. You won't have to worry about becoming a hero once you're my wife. You can take care of the family at home while I use my quirk to save the day. Takoji grinned, perhaps conjuring up some fantastical and strange future in which he would be the world's greatest hero and Hanako would be waiting for him to return home with their kids. However, Takoji-san, I'm not yet your wife. Therefore, why should I take any action? With a furrowed brow, Tuma gave the girl a stern warning glance that conveyed the message, stop being so dumb. Thankful that they had only recently arrived at the UA campus, Hanako rolled her eyes and glanced ahead, seeing her best friend talking to some of their fellow students. She ran over to them, without even stopping to bid farewell to her unbearable fiancé. Hana-chan. Greetings for the morning. Momo knew how uncomfortable and annoying their schoolmate could be, so she gave her pal a faint grin. I see Takoji-san walked you to school today, Momo said. Yes. In any case, who is he? He stood quite tall. Kirishima nodded, inquisitive as well, and Mina smiled, wondering about the boy who had walked her new buddy to school. With a frown, Hanako said, just a childhood friend. Together, Momo-chan, Takoji-san, and I experienced our formative years. How awesome. I went to junior high school with Kirishima as well. Being familiar with someone at a new school is always a plus. It was never enjoyable knowing Takoji. He was a douche. Nevertheless, Hana forced a modest smile and nodded in agreement, though she only saw Yaoyorozu's connection to that statement. With a slight scream, she turned to see who had bumped into her and saw a head of explosive blonde hair storming off into the school. Was that really necessary? She arched an eyebrow. Suddenly, she was shoved to the side by a warm body. For you, that's just Bakugo. With a regretful gesture, Kirishima wiped the back of his head and laughed half-heartedly at his other friend's expense. With a small pout, Hanako dismissed the exchange and wrapped her arms around her stomach in a self-soothing gesture. Well, we probably should head inside too, anyway, she said. Soon, classes will begin. The others nodded, and together they turned and went into the school, making their way through the hallways until they reached their classroom. After taking a seat, Hanako cast a questioning glance at the person sitting to her left by the window. Good morning, Master Bakugo. Did you enjoy your evening following our first day of classes? With a scowl, he crossed his arms and looked out the window, saying, TCH. It was going to be a long day, so she groaned and turned back to the front of the class. Okay. Because I am present here. With a mixture of surprise and amazement, Class 1A turned to face their new hero course teacher, All Might. How amazing was it that the top pro hero of the moment would be teaching at their high school? Very amazing. We're going to be practicing our hero fundamentals today. Please locate your hero outfits, which were created especially for you by the support course using the drawings you sent in before the term began, and change. We're going to meet in the beta training ground. See you shortly. After All Might departed the classroom, the students were left to locate their costumes. Hanako took the briefcase with her name and headed out to change with the other girls. In 15 minutes, nearly every student from Class 1A was in training ground beta. Hanako's costume consisted of a yellow crop top without sleeves, form-fitting pants with a white starburst in the center that showcased her toned stomach and faint scar, black knee-high boots and skin-tight yellow legging-like pants with 2 white stripes running down the side seams. To complete her look, she wore a black domino mask and let her blonde hair hang down her back. Wow, Sunazaka, you're looking pretty mouth-watering in that hero costume. She scowled, trying to figure out who had said that, and noticed that her eyes were dropping as she looked at Minoru Mineta, who was standing in front of her. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, Blonde entered her field of vision and Mineta was shoved aside. She felt her shoulders relax as she let out a breath, thankful that Mineta was no longer bothering her. She dealt with enough annoying boys today. Out of my way, grapeballs. Bakugo growled out the words, taking his new spot near Hanako. It almost seemed like he was defending her, but she brushed that thought away since it was obviously ridiculous. With a pleasant smile, she turned to face her sour classmate and said, I know you probably didn't do it for my benefit, but thank you all the same. TCH. Whatever, he scowled, turning his head away so she wouldn't notice that his cheeks had become slightly redder in response to her compliments. It's not a big deal, stupid. Pupils in Class 1A. Greetings from your first hero basic training course. We appear to be all present, so let's. The students turned to see Izuku running to class in his hero costume as they heard booming footsteps hurrying towards them before All Might could finish his speech. Whoa. He must be a huge fan of All Might. Midoriya's hero costume reminded All Might of himself, which made him giggle a little. Embarrassed, but still amused, All Might continued to express his expectations for their course today. All right, now that everyone appears to be present, a crucial component of being a hero is completing her hero training. It tests you and gets you ready for nearly anything. According to what I hear, you trained and tested your peculiarities using Aizawa's Quirk evaluation test yesterday. We're going to leap ahead a few steps today and have you all take part in pretend villain fights. Tenya Iida raised her hand as one of the kids raised hers, saying, I have a question. Will this resemble the entrance tests when we have to fight several robot types? Excellent question, young Iida. All Might nearly seemed irritated at being interrupted before he could convey their entire job, but he dismissed it. You will all be divided into groups of 2 today by partners. There will be 2 groups, one for the villains and another for the heroes. You may already be aware that most villain attacks occur in public, but you may be surprised to learn that the most infamous and deadly villains typically operate in secret. As heroes, it is your task to sneak inside one of these buildings, the villain's hideout. To win, you must either capture your opponents or their fictitious nuclear bomb. The villains will have to evade capture. If they manage to capture their hero opponents ahead of time, they will emerge victorious. Each group has a 15-minute time limit. Do you have any other queries? Raising her hand, Hanako waited for him to call on her. We have an odd number of students in our class, All Might Sensei. Sorry to interrupt. Will there be 3 students in each group? Miss Shinozaka, you have a great question. All Might grinned at her. Yes, there will be 3 students in each group. You will instantly be assigned to the villain squad, regardless of who is on the 3-person team. Your living weapon will be the third party. When I call your name to draw lots, kindly step up. After a little while, each student received their team assignment, and Hanako discovered that she was one of 3 students with Bakugo and Iida. This should be interesting, she thought to herself. All appropriate teams. You have 5 minutes, villains, to become familiar with your building's layout and devise a defense strategy. Heroes, spend the next 5 minutes planning your infiltration plan. After finishing off their headphones listening to All Might's statement, Hanako turned to face her 2 comrades and asked, which of you wants to be the weapon? Iida opened her mouth to respond, but Bakugo laughed as if she had uttered the silliest question imaginable. Sparkle, go ahead and wield the weapon. It doesn't concern me. Just get out of my way, DEKU, when I destroy that loser. Sparkle, she let out a sigh and glanced at her classmate. I guess I'll be the weapon, before Bakugo stormed out and vanished into one of the halls, leaving her with Iida. Would you like to be my sentinel? Obviously. Within minutes, they could both hear the loud booming sound of Bakugo's explosive quirk on the floor below them. Tenya glanced at her seriously, which only made her grin sweetly at him as the buzzer to commence the pretend combat rang above them. As Iida hurriedly moved to push Uraraka back to the other side of the room, Hanako rolled her eyes and cast a fleeting glance out the window, noticing a reflection on the glass that oddly resembled their other classmate, Ochako Uraraka, hiding behind a pillar. She quickly turned around to set up a full body shield around herself. Uraraka-san, it won't be so simple to obtain our weapon. Hanako smiled and dispersed her barrier to launch a star blast at her friend, watching as a neighboring pillar gave way slightly as a warning. Yeah, especially not when this weapon fights back. The 2 villain team members watched in fascination as Uraraka's eyes enlarged and she abruptly grasped onto the nearest pillar as though it were her lifeline as the entire building trembled and she plummeted to the ground on her bottom. Uraraka yelled, "Hurry and back up," while glaring at her other students. However, it was already too late. When Hanako shot up through the roof and into the ceiling, the floor beneath her feet burst into a massive upward airflow of metal and concrete. Her quirk was working double time to try and protect her skin and organs, but in the end, she had responded too late, leaving her arms and legs scorching. Her face and arms were covered in bloody lacerations, and her left hand had a piece of metal stuck in it. She watched as the ground drew closer and closer, and as she did so, her stomach shot up into her neck. Her yellow-gold power burst from within her, encasing her in a bright yellow-gold circular shield as she closed her eyes and let out a loud scream. She struck the ground with such force and speed that dust covered the surrounding area of the roadway and her shield created a small crater. Hanako's eyesight was cloudy and her eyes felt heavy, but she could just make out the worried yells of her teacher and students. Her last memory was of the sound of an enraged explosion someplace close, and the shadow of Japan's national hero towering over her. It felt strange to wake up. Everything was blurry around her. Somewhere nearby, she could hear muted voices, but for some reason, she couldn't make out what they were saying. She ached. Really hurt. For an instant, Hanako was on the verge of passing away. She sat up, startled, as the agony in her hand suddenly became unbearable. She noticed the white bandages covering her hand when she gazed down at it. Easy, dear. You don't want to overexert yourself after that unnecessary incident. Hanako noticed Recovery Girl gesturing towards a nearby bed, where she could see her classmate Izuku's matching emerald eyes and shining head of magnificent emerald green hair above it. Sanazaka-san. I am so sorry. I would never have used my quirk if I knew you'd get hurt. It will never happen again. I'm so sorry. Please, forgive me. Though I'd understand if you never talked to me again. Midoriya-san, please. I'm fine. Look. She extended her unbandaged hand at her classmate, giving him a feeble smile. And please, my friends can call me Hana. Friends? She asked, clearly relieved after realizing that she wouldn't be able to forgive him after what had transpired at their first hero basic training session. She grinned and said, yes. Friends. He grinned. Then please, call me Izuku, or Deku. I guess. Either is fine with me, I'm just so happy you're okay. Hanako tightened her fist slightly and glanced down at her bandaged hand once again. On her second day, she had been accidentally hurt by another pupil. But was she truly all right? She had experienced a great deal in her brief life, and it still plagues her, however. Yeah. I'm okay. Bakugo growled as he withdrew his hand and lunged towards his classmate, his fist poised to erupt. Izuku lifted his fist as well, preparing to bash Kachan. Abruptly, he started talking loud enough for Uraraka to hear plainly over their headset connection while the two boys unleashed their full force on each other. Grab onto something. Quick. Bakugo realized where Izuku was actually aiming his fist just before they connected, and for a single second, a feeling of fear mixed with an undercurrent of panic raced through him. His teammates would be all right. Either Uraraka would alert them, or they would hear the blast approaching. Everything was all right. Everything has to be just perfect. Not everything was well. With a look of terror, Katsuki saw the ceiling above him and Deku blow forward with such force that he could see dazzling yellow shooting skyward along with the debris. Shit. Stupid Deku, he said, shooting himself to the second floor and attempting to seize the foolish lady from his class with the glistening eyes. Hanako Sanazaka was unlucky to be blasted up together with the ceiling above the second story, which erupted along with it and continued to burst up and through the roof. The air carried the stench of metal, blood. Watching the girls' whirling, damaged bodies soar up and over, Katsuki could see the beads of blood dropping from the hole above him, and he knew it was going right for the hard pavement. He was never going to make it to her in time. With an inhuman snarl, he exclaimed, Deku, and spun around to look down at Izuku through the opening where he had first leapt to the second story. He lost it when he saw a gory crimson meet vibrant emerald. His right hand was smoking when he turned around and slammed his fist covered in nitroglycerin into the pillar right behind him. This caused a spark to ignite and the entire section of the building behind it to burst outward in a spectacular demonstration of his anger towards his classmate and childhood friend. She had best be well. Katsuki Bakugo had a bad day. He still hadn't gotten out of bed to get ready for school, and it was already 7:30 a.m. He felt drowsy and his head was pounding. You know the feeling you have when you don't sleep very much? Yes, it's a very unpleasant feeling. The previous before, he had hardly slept at all, tossing and turning, his thoughts racing and fretting. Was Sparkling all right? Since Deku had also ended up in the infirmary, he had naturally chosen not to go check on her. He is frail. Naturally, Deku, the loser, would wreck everything. It was simply Deku, however, he had learned from his red-haired friend that everything had worked out beautifully with glitter. Hiroshima had spoken to her briefly as they were leaving the campus, and it appeared that she had left for home shortly after the school day finished with very minor injuries, most likely from recovery girl. He looked at his bedside table's digital clock once again and scowled when he saw that it was already 7:35. Why did he care about a stupid extra? It's definitely time for him to move on, get over this, and get ready. After all, he needed to make it to the train. There's no use behaving like a naive nerd over it. I'll still find out this morning. Her soreness persisted. Her body hadn't been beaten so severely in a long time. She had never before been tossed by an explosion, to be sure. Hanako stretched and tipped her neck back and forth, enjoying the little pops that came from her tense joints. This morning's trip to school was relatively quiet, and she was relishing every moment of relaxation before having to confront her classmates following yesterday's tragedy. To be honest, Hanako felt ashamed. She hoped they wouldn't hold it above her head because she was the first kid in their class to get hurt. Well, excluding Izuku fracturing his finger during the Quirk assessment exams from their first day. If she had been able, she would have taken action, but his Quirk was just so powerful that the explosion it caused was, to put it mildly, startling. At least just before she hit the ground, she was able to materialize her Quirk into a full body shield. Well, if she hadn't. When she had returned home, her grandfather had been very upset with her. Her hand was still covered in a white bandage, which he had noticed right away. He had questioned her to find out what had happened. He had given her a slap and instructed her to improve when she told him that a pro hero would never have found themselves in such predicament. That Tumataka-oji would never allow himself to be the victim of something so foolish. She represented a letdown to the Sinozaka family name. For the rest of the evening, including supper, homework time, and even Hachiro's new, even more rigorous, training schedule, that final remark alone had stayed with her. It was eventually time for her to go to bed once everything was said and done, and she obviously slept well and vividly that night. Eventually, she traveled to the UA campus, and when she noticed the mass of reporters encircling the entrance gates, she was startled out of her reverie. Good, she scowled a little. I have to get through all of these people right now, or I'll be late. As she walked up to the entrance, she was swarmed by reporters and had microphones and recorders pressed up against her face. Excuse me, miss. Is it true that All Might, Japan's #1 hero, is teaching at UA High School? Can you tell us how he is as a teacher? What course does he teach? Is it intimidating being taught by the #1 pro hero? I bet there's a lot to live up to. Uncomfortably, Hanako glanced around her before feeling overwhelmed and saying, I. A warm hand wrapped around her wrist and gently tugged, dragging her behind a tall kid with explosive blonde hair and an equally explosive personality. TCH. Come on, Sparkle. You're going to be late for class. They were both through the front gate and climbing the school's steps in a matter of seconds. Observing that Bakugo had not yet released her, Hanako looked down at her wrist. She cleared her throat awkwardly, which made him stop walking, which led to her bumping into his back. She laughed at the ridiculous expression on his face as she glanced up at him. She smiled shyly at him, almost too much for him to handle. Sorry, Bakugo-san. I didn't mean to bump into you. I was just trying to get your attention so you knew that you could let go of my wrist now. There are no reporters inside the entrance gates, right? She said. For a minute, his red eyes met hers, looking into her glittering, yellow-orange irises, then slid down to look at their hands, finding that he was still clutching her wrist. He felt his heart quicken and his perspiration increase. What the heck? The response came right away. He let go of her wrist as if it had burnt him, then spun around and walked quickly to their classroom ahead of her. After blinking, Hana silently giggled to herself and trailed behind him. At times, Katsuki was very humorous. After all of the excitement of the day before, today had looked pretty ordinary. Thus far, all of their classes for the day have been rather simple and seems incredibly dull. The selection of their class representatives was the sole noteworthy event. Aizawa had announced at the start of class that Class 1A needed to elect a president and vice president to represent them in matters of education. Iida then suggested that they choose their representatives through a democratic process that would involve a vote. With 3 votes, Izuku was victorious, while Hanako's closest buddy secured the vice president position with 2 votes. Sadly, Iida received 0 votes. It was clear that Hana had supported Momo. The day seemed to drag after that morning conversation, and by lunchtime, every student was eager to be seated around the cafeteria and talking about their studies, favorite heroes, aspirations, and other topics. Most of her classmates were seated at a table with Hanako sitting next to Momo. The 2 girls conversed gently with one another, occasionally giggling over something that was mentioned. Bakugo watched them both from his position a few tables away, muttering to himself in a low voice as he took sporadic, forceful nibbles out of his food. Kirishima arched an eyebrow at his strange behavior and turned to follow his friend's line of sight, snooping on the 2 girls. With a sly grin, he turned back to face the blonde. "Any particular reason you're watching Sunazaka and Yaoyorozu so closely, Bakugo?" "None of your business, shitty hair," he grumbled and swallowed a particularly huge bite of food. "MMHM. You like her, don't you? Sunazaka, I mean. She is pretty cool." With a pout, Katsuki turned back to Kirishima and felt a surge of heat rise to his cheeks. He coughed and sipped some water. "TCH. I don't like her. She's just some dumb extra. But an interesting dumb extra. She'll still never beat me." With a smirk pulling at the corner of his lips, he raised an eyebrow at his fair-haired pal and asked, "Since when are you 2 in competition?" "Everyone's my competition. I'm going to be the next number 1 and none of these extras are going to get in my way, got it?" "Right." A deafening siren that sounded over the entire UA interrupted him, building, shocking everyone in the area and making them cease their talks in shock. Upon realizing that the siren could only indicate a serious incident, and after receiving confirmation from a few upperclassmen that they needed to leave right away, all of the cafeteria students hurried to the closest exit, causing severe gridlock in the hallways. After being by Momo's side for a moment, Hanako was shoved and on the verge of falling if not for 2 sets of hands that grasped her arms and helped her to stand again. She noticed Bakugo and Kirishima when she turned to face her 2 rescuers. "Thanks, boys. You're my heroes," she said with a teasing wink and a bright smile. "Whatever." Following Hanako's mischievous attitude, Kirishima chuckled and gave her an overly enthusiastic salute. "Of course. All in a day's work, miss." After exchanging a quick glance, the 2 started laughing. Bakugo regarded them both as though they were aliens. In any case, why the heck was it so funny? Stupid glitter. Horrible, awful hair. Quietly huffing, he glanced away for a few minutes before allowing the tiniest of delighted smiles to flit across his lips so swiftly that nobody would see them. They were all distracted from whatever the hell was going on when they heard Iida's firm and commanding voice telling everyone to stay put, that the siren had just been set off by some reporters who had entered the campus, and that everything was okay. Everything was all right. A soft giggle came from next to him, and when Katsuki looked down, he saw Hanako giggling to herself. She looked up to meet his gaze and saw him raise a brow in mute inquiry as to why she was laughing. "I just think it's funny that all of us," she said, gesturing to herself and the other people in the hallway, "just panicked and acted like a bunch of scared, helpless civilians. Aren't we supposed to be future pros?" She grinned up at him and laughed once more. She then turned to face the windows and noticed the unruly reporters chatting with Present Mike and Eraserhead. "Sorry, it's really not that funny. You can just ignore me, Bakugo-san. I'm being weird." She was surprised to hear Bakugo snort and then laugh softly. He smirked as she whipped her head back around and stared up at him, amused. "You're something else, Sparkle." After all of the pupils had gone back to their classes, Midoriya stood in front of Class 1A and declared that he was giving Iida his place. It made sense because he acted as a class president should have throughout the reporter's intrusion. The rest of the class concurred with Aizawa's approval of the transfer. Hanako harbored mild sympathy for her closest buddy. Shouldn't she have been given the position as she was chosen the second most qualified candidate? In theory, at least. She smiled sympathetically at Momo, who waved back to her that everything was all right. It was nearly time for their school day to end as she took a quick look at the clock. It would most likely drag after their exhilaration at lunch, even more than it had in the morning. The day seemed to go very quickly despite her concerns that it would be lengthy. In order to mentally prepare for her training after school, she had spent the final of her 2 periods staring out the window, taking sporadic notes, and jotting down suggestions for defensive strategies in the margins of her notebook. Her grandfather had assured her that she would be able to see her uncle Eiichi this coming weekend for his birthday if she managed to pass his test this evening. Hanako hurriedly packed her bags and made her way to her first-floor locker as soon as classes were finally released for the day. She felt a presence behind her while she was putting on her new shoes, and when she looked back, she saw Tuma standing over her, his expression frowning. Rumor is my fiancé was seen holding hands with some brat from Class 1A this morning. She breathed deeply. Takoji-san. I wasn't holding hands with anyone. A classmate helped me get through the reporters this morning by pulling me by the wrist. And please don't refer to me as your fiancé at school. Huh? Why shouldn't I refer to you as my fiancé when that is exactly what you are? You're going to have to accept this arrangement sooner or later or your grandfather will not be pleased. What would he think of you treating your husband this way? Hana scowled. Why was this what he always did? It enraged me. Takoji-san, you're not my husband yet. And don't worry, I've already accepted this arrangement. It's not like I've had much of a choice. Takoji's scowl increased, and he silently reached for her arm, pulling her close as his nails momentarily became short claws and his skin went a deep scarlet around his fingers. He moved in close to whisper in her ear, his red eyes growing deeper. Last chance to behave or you know what will happen, sunshine. A shudder ran down her spine, and she nodded rapidly, grateful when he eventually withdrew, even though he didn't take her arm away just yet. Now, we are going to walk home together. As an apology, you are going to agree to attend the upcoming gala for my father's company next month as my date and your grandfather will never have to know about your insolence. Understood? Trudging through, she said, yes, Takoji-san. When she eventually let go of Tuma's arm, she walked out, not realizing that Katsuki was standing next to her, observing her from his own locker. Who the hell even is that guy? Kirishima furrowed her brow and turned to face the person he was referring to. A spark of recognition lit up his eyes. Oh, that's Takoji. Mina and I saw them together yesterday morning before school. Sunazaka and Yaoyorozu said they all grew up together. Childhood friends, I think. Bakugo scowled. Friends from childhood? She didn't seem overly thrilled to see him, and his conversation with her beside her locker didn't exactly shout friendship. However, he and that dumb DEKU were constantly referred to as childhood pals, so perhaps they actually were. How come he gave a damn? In any case, he didn't like the individual and was furious. He was clearly not good enough to be a top hero because he was just in Class 1B and something about him just looked odd. After taking his shoes out of his locker and putting them on, he picked up his luggage and left the school in the direction of the train station. Bakugo was irritated with that guy the entire way home. Yes. That guy from Takoji really got under his skin. Again, girl. With her palms facing Takoji, Hanako extended her trembling hands in front of her. Her grandfather had advised her to research defensive tactics in preparation for tonight's training session, but he had neglected to clarify that she would be defending herself against her abuser. I don't know how much more my arms can take, grandfather, please. I said again, girl, or have you forgotten our deal? With a trembling breath, she wiped one hand over the blood beneath her nose. She was exerting herself too much. With a sly smile on his face, Takoji raised his deep red hands and struck her quickly. In order to avoid getting clobbered, she had to move fast to raise another barrier. The power radiating from her shield caused her arms to burn and her palms to uncomfortably heat up. After a short while, she managed to let go of her shield and gasp for air, clutching her right arm painfully while her left arm throbbed uneasily. Takoji then retreated and lowered his arms, revealing their true flesh tone and human look. With apprehension, Hana turned to face her grandfather and prayed in silence that he would accept that as the last of her tests. She was surprised to see Hachiro smirk smugly and nod in approval. You pass. Even though Hanako was completely exhausted, her eyes started to become a little watery, and she cracked the brightest smile. This weekend, she would get to see her uncle Eiichi. It had been far too long since she'd seen him, embraced him, and laughed with him. He was her favorite person in the world. Her only task at hand was to decide what to get him for his birthday. I'm her uncle, by blood. Why am I not able to claim the rights to my own damn niece? Eiichi was enraged. After an officer had been dispatched to the Shinozaka residence to pick up the now orphaned Hanako, he had gone to the police station. They had informed him that the only family member who could be granted her parole was the one who claimed to be her guardian. The authorities turned down his request for guardianship, even though he had stepped forward right away. It seems that the girl had already been approached and accepted by someone else. But to whom? She doesn't have anyone else that would claim her. Who the hell is saying that they can? I'm sorry, sir, but unfortunately we can't disclose that type of information with you as you are not directly related to the case. Miss Shinozaka's new guardian will be here to collect her soon, I'm sure. You are more than welcome to wait if you'd like to see who that may be for yourself, but other than that, my hands are tied. With a frown, Eiichi gave in and moved to locate a free seat in the waiting room. Hours grew out of minutes. Hours stretched into more hours, and before long, there was more than a day. He was furious. Who would take her, or any child for that matter, and then make them wait so long to return home to a place of safety? As the police station door opened, Eiichi snapped out of his reverie and looked up. He snarled as his gaze lingered on the man who had just entered the police station. That idiot. Abruptly rising from his chair, he walked over to the older man. What the hell are you doing here, Hachiro? Hachiro cast a scornful glance at the other man. Eiichi. How nice to see you. It has been a long time. Tell me, how is life treating you now that you've decided you're no longer a Shinozaka? He taunted, but Eiichi scowled and said, answer the damn question, Dad. Why are you here? I'm here to take Hanako Shinozaka home. Reika didn't want you involved in her daughter's life. You can't just come in here and take her. You have no right. He growled at his son, I have the only right, boy. As for Reika, she got herself killed so she doesn't have a voice on the matter anymore. Hachiro Shinozaka? The officer asked, approaching the two warily. Hachiro nodded at him. Please, follow me, sir. We have some paperwork to sign and then you both will be free to go. Of course. Eiichi felt his fists tighten at his sides as he saw his father leave with the policeman. That cunning prick. He would do all in his power to obtain custody of his niece, come hell or high water. Sleep, no matter how much time it takes. We all discover as we get older how crucial sleep can be. It should go smoothly and provide a brief period of calm. It also allows the body's healing processes whether it is ill or wounded. If it was that significant, though, why was Hanako finding it so difficult to experience it this past week? But unlike the previous times, this one was for much happier reasons. This weekend Hano would get to see her uncle. Curled up under her blankets, she grinned to herself as she glanced at her alarm clock's vivid digits. Time to get up was now. She withdrew the blankets and shivered a little in her bedroom in the cool morning air. In just 15 minutes, Hanako had composed herself and looked decent for the next school day. Additionally, she had chosen to get ready a little early so that she would have time to window shop on the drive to UA. After all, it was only 3 days left before Eiichi's birthday, that includes today. She put on her compression gloves and gave herself one more glance before leaving for the day. The previous evening, Hachiro had truly tested her limits, and her nerves in her arms had suffered as a result. She had never believed she could work as hard as she had after meeting him. Hannah had to give the old man credit. Although his strategies were still terrible, they did appear to be effective most of the time. She had to go see Recovery Girl as soon as she arrived at school. She might be able to ease some of the agony. As Hanako started to approach the UA campus, she noticed a well-known video game store a few storefronts up. She picked up her speed and cast a disbelieving, heartbroken gaze at the display window. A banner for a new game featuring her parents' happy, heroic visage as its current advertisement was splattered across the window. You see, there was this up-and-coming video game company in Tokyo that made a Mortal Kombat-like game where the primary characters were all well-known villains and popular pro-heroes. She discovered, much to her dismay, That Stargirl and Sunslayer, two of the selectable characters, were her real parents. What was even more stunning was that Moonfish, the creature that had easily slain them both on live television, was one of the playable villains. Her eyes blazed. Never pegged you as someone who plays video games, Sparkle. Her eyes widened as she turned to face Bakugo, not expecting to see him standing there at that precise moment. She was aware of one thing, though. She had tears in her eyes. She was in tears. Additionally, Katsuki Bakugo was observing her. Bakugo-san. Good morning. So nice to see you, she greeted him with a fake smile, rubbing her eyes rapidly as she gazed up at him expectantly, hoping he wouldn't see that she had been crying in the middle of the day on the pavement outside their high school. As my grandfather would say, pathetic. Looking down at her, Katsuki's eyes narrowed with rage that someone could have brought his classmate to tears, and his brows knitted in perplexity as to how she could be crying. With a frown, he tightened his right fist and said, "TCH. Why the hell are you crying?" He observed her, growing more perplexed, as she bit her lip and averted her gaze from him. When they met eyes, she never took her eyes off of him. He felt alarms go off in his head because she was doing it now, even though she was always facing him directly. Oh, it's nothing. Just a silly old memory, she exclaimed, turning around as soon as she realized what she had said. I'm fine. Really, she said, wincing at her own words. With skepticism, he trailed her gaze and eventually caught up to her pace, focusing on the dark gray gloves that were drawn up beyond her elbows beneath her UA outfit, and the gloves. He felt his breath catch in his throat for a brief moment as Hanako looked up at him and said, I kicked major butt in my training last night and now I get to see my uncle this weekend, but now I have to wear these while I'm healing. Her warm, sparkling eyes caught his attention for the first time that morning. What the heck? They walked silently for the remainder of their brief stroll, and they reached their classroom door before either of them realized how long they had been strolling together. After giving Bakugo one more shy grin, Hanako left the room ahead of her and took a seat, eagerly waiting for their homeroom instructor to arrive. Her morning plans were significantly changed when she saw the advertisement for the game and ran into her classmate. Her intention was to get to school early enough to have time to visit Recovery Girl and receive a treatment or two before classes began. All it would have to do is wait for a lull. Aizawa stood up from behind his desk, clearly having just woken from a nap in his hilarious sleeping bag. Good morning, a deep voice said, echoing through the room. Today will be different than what you have seen already at UA. We will be focusing on another important part of being a hero. He paused, then held up a card with the word Rescue written across it. Class 1A will be taking a field trip to one of our off-site training arenas to practice rescue missions. You will all be supervised by me, All Might, and another pro. Now, get changed into your hero costumes and meet at the front gates to board the bus in 15 minutes. Iida took command right away, telling his classmates to queue in single file so they could pick up their superhero costumes. Hanako burst out laughing and rolled her eyes at her too serious classmate. But she followed her instructions, and in less than 10 minutes, the whole Class 1A had arrived at the entrance gates to board the buses. To board the bus more quickly, Iida gave the command for everyone to create a single queue. Glancing down at her hands, Hana saw that she was still donning compression gloves, which were obviously not a part of her superhero outfit. It seems that I ought to have scheduled a visit with Recovery Girl earlier in the day. Class 1A anxiously awaited news about what to anticipate from their first rescue mission training in the building's atrium following a tense but hilarious bus ride to 13's Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. Where's All Might? He was supposed to meet us here. 13 gave Eraserhead a likely disapproving glance before speaking softly enough for no pupils to overhear. How irrational. Class, it looks like you'll just have the two of us today. Eraserhead grimaced. Abruptly the electricity flickered off, leaving an overwhelming quiet. Looks of confusion swirled around as people tried to piece together what had transpired. Mineta exclaimed in a panic, pointing his trembling finger down the atrium steps to the central fountain, where a big, dark mist had started to develop. Look, what is that? She exclaimed. Hanako looked down at the darkening mist, which was getting darker and darker, and her stomach sank. Should this become what she was afraid it would, she would be of no help at all. She scowled and grimaced as she looked down at her clenched hands and felt the pain. Well, I guess I should have scheduled a visit with Recovery Girl this morning. Eraserhead, his scarf coming to life, slid his brilliant yellow goggles down over his glowing eyes and yelled, "Get back, stay with 13. What's this?" The last three criminals emerged from the mist, and an unsettling laugh erupted. The man speaking, a tall, pale man with hair the color of ash and hands plastered to different parts of his face and chest, looked up at the UA pupils accompanied by their two guardians. He turned his head to the side so that he could more easily reach beneath the hand that was immediately on his face, and he started angrily clawing at his neck, saying, "My sources told me that All Might would be here. Kinda hard to kill the final boss when he doesn't even show up." Aizawa leapt forward from his perch above and dashed to meet the three main villains of the gang as well as the other villains swarming the fountain area. Eraserhead, your quirk isn't designed to take on all of those villains head-on. A pro has to have more than one trick, kid, said Aizawa, turning to face Izuku. As soon as he reached the foot of the steps, he engaged and quickly rendered several enemies helpless with a few blows. Kurogiri, kill those stupid kids. Maybe All Might will come if he hears about us killing all of those stupid kids, and then we can kill him too. Ochako let out a startled cry upon realizing that the mist villain had materialized before her. All of the students' attention was fixed on her, and they all yelled in fear for her to move away from him. Stepping forward, 13 triggered Black Hole, drawing the villain towards the suit's exposed palm. The mist villain materialized a doorway behind 13, and Ashido shrieked in terror as the quirk began tearing him apart. Hanako watched in wonder as Bakugo and Kirishima charged fearlessly towards the villain, expecting to deliver a devastating hit that would knock him out and save the pro-hero, even though several of her classmates fled in the opposite direction. Sadly, they were unsuccessful. Anarchy. Absolute anarchy. There's no other word that could adequately explain what transpired next. The mist villain burst out and spread his quirk throughout the atrium, drowning out cries of surprise, angry declarations, explosions, and bright lights. After a brief period of silence, the villain withdrew his quirk and laughed ominously, revealing that most of Class 1A had vanished overnight. Damn it, shitty hair. We have to get back to the fountain so I can kick that mist villain's ass. Kirishima sighed with exasperation. He was stuck with his impetuous and often agitated friend out of all the people he might have been paired with during this struggle. Yeah, because that worked out so well for us the first time. They heard a hurt cry emerge from the outside of the building they had been warped to before Bakugo could respond. Without pausing, the two youngsters ran to the closest window and peered down at the dilapidated street below. The sight of it made them both turn around, bolt down the stairs, and thoroughly destroy any 2-bit villain who dared stand in their way of her. She was hobbling. The warp gate villain had dropped her off from above, leaving her to crash onto the hard asphalt below, when she'd been sent to this disaster zone. Though it hurt, Hana was very sure she had injured her ankle. Her hands were hurting more than her ankle. She tried to make a shield, the same one she'd made on her second day of hero basic training, to try to absorb her fall. Stupid notion. She was rushing clumsily down the street away from the terrifying villain who was chasing after her, her arms hurting and her hands feeling like they were on fire. Get back here, brat, I haven't even had a chance to play with you yet. A rifle went off behind her, and then she heard the startling sound of something ricocheting nearby. She hurried away, reflexively lifting her arms to shield the back of her head. You might be fast, Blondie, but no one is faster than a gun. The villain yelled as he continued to fire warning rounds with his gun. The adjoining building's exit door blew off its hinges, almost toppling her off her feet. Kirishima was in front of Hanako before she even realized what was happening. He was supporting her shoulders and examining her for injuries, focusing especially on her hands and arms because the gloves had come off when her quirk was triggered. Wow, what happened to you? Your arms, Kirishima-san, I'm so glad you're okay. Who came? Sanazaka was about to ask her query when there was an explosion behind her. She whirled around in time to witness Bakugo use his unique ability to smash the villain back into a neighboring structure, knocking him out cold and immobilizing him. With a fleeting expression of worry in his eyes that she believed she had nearly imagined, he turned to face her before scowling and stomping away. "What the hell were you thinking, Sparkle?" Hanako gave a blink. Was he really this person? Was he truly that angry with her now? He reached her before she did, and he gently took hold of one of her arms above the afflicted area, drawing it in closer so he could examine it. Upon observing the severe bruises extending from her wrist upwards and the minor blisters on her hand's palm, his expression appeared to intensify tenfold. "Stupid. You don't even have control over your own quirk, do you?" What? I do. This was just me pushing myself too far." She reddened, mortified. He growled and dropped her arm as if it had burned him, saying, "Yeah, and look what almost happened because of it, stupid," before turning and marching off in the direction of the far fountain area. Kirishima stared at his two pals and laughed, really laughed. It was funny how dense they were. "Come on, Sinazaka, or we'll miss the party," she said. "I'm not sure I really want to go to this party," but she followed him cautiously. After a little while, he bowed and gestured for her to lie on his back. Grinning, she leapt forward, and the two of them sprinted to catch up to Katsuki. Kashima is truly an angel. There was nothing that could have equipped the three of them for what they discovered at the fountain. Their teacher was barely awake on the tiled floor, a slow-growing pool of blood surrounding his lifeless body. The hand villain was on the verge of seizing Izuku, while the enormous Nomu hand was ready to smash Tsuyu. As Aizawa lifted his head to make eye contact with the hand villain, Izuku pulled back his arm to deliver a punch, and Hanako let out a desperate cry. It appeared as though time stood still. "Eraserhead. You really are so cool," he said, turning back to face the gory mess on the ground with a menacing grin under the hand on his face that said, "Kurogiri." Kurogiri launched himself forward, prepared to strike, but Bakugo caught him off guard by throwing him to the ground and using his overwhelming strength to hold him there. "Nomu, kill all those stupid brats," snarled Shigaraki, gesturing with a shaking finger at Bakugo and the other teenagers who had joined him in the fountain area. As he scanned the three other teenagers, he noticed that one boy had shockingly red, spiky hair, the other boy had half-white, half-red hair, and the girl, that girl, had shockingly orange eyes and blonde hair. "Stop." The Nomu stopped short of his approach, waiting for its master's order. It had stopped moments before it crashed into Sinazaka and Kirishima. You look familiar," he said, stroking his neck while wondering why this female had the appearance of. She took a cautious step back, and he slowly started to approach her with a menacing smile. "You're her, aren't you?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Hanako said as she kept backing away from the villain, sensing that everyone was staring at her. "Stargirl, Sunslayer, ring any bells, princess?" "Shut up. You know nothing," she said, feeling her hands painfully heat up and her eyes burning with rage. In the meantime, DEKU, Asui, and Mineta had succeeded in approaching Aizawa and the other pupils. Kirishima stood next to Todoroki, glancing between Sinazaka and his classmates. "Who are Stargirl and Sunslayer?" he asked, glaring at DEKU because he knew that man would most likely be familiar with their identities. "Oh, Stargirl and Sunslayer were two pretty popular pro-heroes. Up until 5 years ago, they worked together as a team to take down top wanted villains in Tokyo." "So, why'd they stop teaming up 5 years ago?" When they had first met, Izuku had already pieced together the story of the girl with the sparkling eyes. Well, one of the villains they had been chasing killed them both on a live news broadcast. Their daughter, Hanako, became an orphan that day. "Rumor has it that she saw the entire thing on TV," Izuku said, glancing at the girl. Everyone's eyes grew wide as Bakugo remembered finding Hanako sobbing in front of the game store early that morning. Her parents' pro-hero poster in the window was the reason she had been crying. He felt like a fool now. Glancing at the girl, he growled, "Don't listen to him, Sparkle." After giving the other teenagers a sidelong glance and chuckling darkly, Shigaraki reached out to try to grasp the girl in front of him and said, "I know someone that would be very eager to sink their long white teeth into you, too." Her eyes went wide, and she felt a surge of panic rush through her, but before she could say anything, All Might made his explosive entrance and blew the doors off the hinges of the USJ. With an enraged scowl, he peered down at the scene below him before launching himself into action and shoving the Nomu away from his children, sending dust flying from the surrounding area. "Have no fear, students, for I am here," he said. As the others crowded together on the ground to try and prevent themselves from being blown away even further, Hanako was blown backwards along with the others. "Hurry, Sue and Mineta, take Professor Aizawa up to 13 and the others," DEKU said to Hana. "Can you walk? You should go too." With a nod of her head, Hana and the other two hurriedly pushed their teacher in the direction of the other students. Since All Might was here, reinforcements would follow shortly. In the end, everything would come together, everybody would be secure. The bus voyage back to the United States was eerily quiet after the USJ villain onslaught. With DEKU gone to the hospital to receive treatment for his wounds, and Recovery Girl taking care of the other injured students, all the other students relished the little calm they had while they gazed out the windows, dozed, or simply lost themselves in meditation. Pro Hero 13, along with their homeroom instructor All Might, had also gone to the hospital to receive medical attention for injuries. Among the students who had been lost in contemplation was Hanako Sinazaka. The hand villain's words would not leave her mind. "I know someone that would be very eager to sink their long white teeth into you, too." She was well aware of the person he was referring to, and she would pay no attention to him again. Like hell. With a quick glance at her irascible classmate, Hana turned around in her seat and flinched at the voice behind her. "Excuse me." He grimaced and pointed angrily out the window. "Like hell that bastard is gonna get his hands on you. TCH. Stupid extra," he said. She kept her inquisitive expression on his face, but then a tiny grin appeared on her lips and she gave him a sorrowful thumbs up with her damaged hand. It had been less than an hour since he had picked her up from the police station. "My thoughts exactly, Bakugo-san." For quite some time, Hachiro had been monitoring his granddaughter while they were in his automobile. Hanako's empty eyes gazed blankly out of the car window. She looked tired, and her eyes were bloodshot from so many hours of sobbing. The vehicle came to rest on an empty lot that held an abandoned warehouse. "Get out." Hanako blinked and said, "Pardon me." Hachiro scowled and motioned for her to unlock the passenger side door. "You heard me. Get out, girl." Hana obeyed and got out of the suddenly still car. "Sinazakas aren't weak." "Are you weak, girl?" Her eyes blinked a little as she turned to face her grandfather, but then she said with determination, "No, I'm not weak." "And do Sinazakas act like this when something bad happens? Or do they react with determination and resolve?" Hanako gazed into her grandfather's bright orange eyes and scowled, gripping her fist. The last 30 hours flooded her thoughts with vivid memories. Recollections of her celebrating her 10th birthday by opening presents while seated on the couch with her parents, Reika and Masaomi. Recollections of her sketching in her brand new journal as her uncle placed their supper order. Recollections from the broadcast live. Recollections of patiently waiting for her to be brought home. "We react with strength." Smirking, Hachiro said, "Prove it." Her grandfather gestured for her to go into the warehouse, and before she could object, powerful hands dragged her inside. She turned around to see Hachiro's intimidating face as he loomed over her, his eyes a vivid orange. "Gee, grandfather, what?" She let out a cry. When she last remembered, she was experiencing a blinding ache in her right shoulder, a sharp rise in internal body temperature, and a brilliant light. Her final thought was of the warehouse surrounding her turning into a pile of ashes. Not any more, not any less. What took place that evening? The following day's classes were postponed to give the 1A students time to recuperate and process what transpired during their fictitious rescue operation at the USJ. For the majority, this meant unwinding and catching up with friends to learn the truth about what had transpired. For the pupils in Class 1A, it meant mentally reliving every second of the USJ attack. It also presented Hanako Sinazaka with the chance to receive more training, naturally. In the training chamber of her grandfather, Hanako stood before Tuma. From across the room, her eyes blazed brilliantly yellow-orange, her gaze scorching him. "Again, girl." She blasted a star blast at her opponent, gritting her teeth and launching her fists forward. With his hands and arms expanded and animalistic in appearance, Takoji deflected the blast and sliced his claws through it to defuse it. With a condescending expression on his face, Tuma chuckled and said, "You'll never stand a chance against me in a real battle, Sunshine. Face it. Girl heroes are weak. You'd never survive against an actual villain. Just like your mother." Incredulous, Hana glanced first at her opponent and then at her grandfather, as if expecting him to correct her. All she received in return was a blank expression. With a sigh, she returned her focus to her childhood buddy. Hanako ducked low and launched forward, saying, "My mother wasn't weak, and neither am I." Takoji didn't have time to react as she blasted into him as a burst of star energy exploded from her feet. Smoke and dust rose from the training room as the wall collapsed, sending her and Takoji hurtling through it and out into the backyard. Hana straightened up and brushed off her clothes before turning to face her grandfather, who was incredibly happy. "Very good. Go clean up and get ready for dinner. We will continue exploring this new ability tomorrow after school." She gazed down at Takoji and nodded, letting a tiny smile cross her lips. He simply pushed her hand away as she extended it to assist him in getting up, got to his feet furiously, and left without saying another word. For some, the day off from school had been restful, however, it had been enlightening for others. As Hanako Shinozaka and Tuma Takoji approached UA, Katsuki Bakugo observed. Next day, high school. Why was she with that guy all the time? After all, he was simply a loser wannabe from Class 1B. What prevented Shinozaka from socializing with his classmates? That wouldn't be a downgrade, at least. Gritting his teeth, he sent a sharp glance at his red-haired friend. Why is she always with that guy? As Kirishima turned to look at who he was referring to, he saw Takoji and Shinozaka entering the locker room together. "I told you, man, they're childhood friends. Like me and Ishido. I don't see it being anything more than that." He then laughed. "Are you worried, Bakugo?" A displeased frown appeared on Bakugo's lips as he turned to face his awful hair. "Yeah, right. Why would I be worried?" Bakugo said. Just as Kirishima turned to respond, they heard a rather loud bang. Turning around, they saw Hanako forced up against her locker, her arms securely held by Takoji, who was sneering at her with his face down low so his eyes met hers. She attempted to release his hold on her arm with her free hand, but her eyes were closed and her face slightly turned away. "If you ever pull that shit that you pulled during training yesterday again, you'll have more than a few scratches in return. Do you understand me, Sunshine?" Just as Hana was about to nod, she sensed his weight being drawn away from her. With caution, she opened her eyes and looked to see that Bakugo and Kirishima had pushed him away from her and were now standing defensively in front of her. Her eyes grew a little wider. Pulling back to go closer to Hanako, Kirishima asked, "Do we have a problem here?" As she spoke quietly, he felt her tiny hand lightly brush across his arm. She sent a pointed glance at Tuma, who scowled and left, but not before giving her a glare that she knew indicated he would not be forgiving of her behavior during training tonight. "It's okay. I'm fine. Takoji-san was just messing around, right?" she said. After a brief interval of observing him leave, Bakugo turned and approached Hanako, who immediately retreated before her back struck the lockers. He scowled as he stared down at her. "Great choice in friends, Sparkle. Does he do that shit often?" Glancing up at him, she saw that gory crimson met yellow-orange hues. Afterward, she looked around the entrance area and noticed multiple pairs of eyes observing everyone. Without responding, she bit her lip, shoved him away, and ran to their classroom. When Kirishima placed his hand on Katsuki's shoulder, he clenched his hands in shock as he glanced after her. "Give her time, man. Obviously there is some stuff we don't know about her life outside of class." The impulsive youngster did not reply, but fiercely followed her, nearly stomping his boots on the way to their classroom with his friend. This was going to be a very embarrassing day. "All right, class. You all survived the USJ attack, and I hate to tell you, but your fight isn't over yet." With nervous expectation, the students glanced back at Eraserhead, waiting for him to inform them that the villains were on the attack once more. They were all shocked by his next statement. The UA Sports Festival is in a few weeks, so you'll be putting in more training. This is an important event for anyone that ever plans on going pro. All of Japan's top pro heroes will be there, scouting out the competitor pool for their next potential intern. Only the top students will get offers from some of the biggest names in the pro circuit. Try harder. With some expressing their delight, they all straightened in their chairs. Everyone except for Sinazaka Hanako. Since the beginning of class, Bakugo noted that she had been sitting silently at her desk, staring down at her notebook or out the window. With a worried expression on her face, she was currently staring up at the classroom clock. They could train together or separately for a while, Eraserhead said, dismissing them for the remainder of the day. When everyone else had grabbed their belongings, she was still sitting and keeping a tight eye on the entrance. When the entire school learned about the impending sports festival, she was certain he would come look for her. The sneering looks of their classmates greeted them all when Iida opened the door. She noticed a face in particular, and it was grinning menacingly back at her. She looked at him, and Katsuki saw him too, a frown appearing on his lips as he inadvertently stepped closer to her desk before moving to the door. Out of my way, extras. Takoji turned to face him, his eyes dark crimson, nearly black, and he was already giving him a fierce look. He narrowed his eyes. Who is this guy? Iida waved his arms wildly and said, Bakugo. Stop, what are you doing? You'll just make them more agitated. Huh. They're here to scout out the competition. We've survived a real villain attack. They want to see if we live up to all the rumors. Everyone turned to see the boy who had just spoken, his incredibly bright purple hair sticking out in the hallway. That's right. He smirked and looked from Bakugo's face to the rest of the students, saying, We're here to see if you're really all that they say you are. And to warn you that you better bring everything you've got to the sports festival. Rumor is if a student from another class shows potential, they'll transfer them to the hero course. And they'll have to transfer someone out to make room. His gaze settled on Hanako Sinazaka, who remained seated, and he raised an eyebrow. She didn't just appear remarkably familiar, but she wasn't participating in the chaos in the corridor. Fascinating. Huh. Go ahead and try. Katsuki shoved past the students in his path and moved forward, with his peers seizing the chance to trail behind him as he moved away from the group. At this moment, Hanako managed to gather her belongings and made her way to the front of the class to speak with Professor Aizawa. She gave him a piece of paper, an equipment request form she had gotten from her grandfather the previous evening, and then she left the classroom, disregarding Takoji as she sped down the corridor to meet her friend Momo Yaoyarozu. There should be interest from the UA Sports Festival, particularly if she faced Takoji-san in the championship match. It was enough to refer to Hanako Sinazaka as weak. She had had enough of him making fun of her. She had had enough of hiding. She would demonstrate her abilities to everyone on the planet. And that would be really fantastic. Laughing. His laughing reached her ears. Hanako felt scared. Her granddad had gone to train with the son of his partner. He was also really frightening. She had been waiting for him on the other side of the training pitch. She was unaware of his peculiarity, and now that she thinks about it, she should have known it would be something really scary given to Takoji's personality. However, she was unprepared for the terror he had unleashed. Tuma had been obnoxiously provoking her to attack him just a moment before. However, she was now too close. He had changed into something out of her worst dreams. It had surprised her that he was monstrous. His frame had thickened, his eyes had darkened, and he had nearly doubled in height. What was most startling, though, were his long, sharp jaws and claws. He emitted a low growl and his eyes had grown black. Sunshine, let's play. Run and hide, I'll find you, I promise. He raised a claw to his lips, revealing a lengthy tongue that licked them. He laughed viciously and leapt at her, slicing his claws through the air as he gripped her in the stomach. Well, what are you waiting for? Run, he exclaimed. She turned and ran as fast as she could to escape him, and there appeared 4 long gashes. Despite applying pressure to her wounds, she could feel the blood oozing through her hands as she raced, her face marked with sheer panic. Somebody help me. Anyone. Please. The maid had made a move. However, Hanako still felt his claws ripping into her skin, and she had terrible nightmares about his visage that night. I hope that was the last time she ever saw him looking like that. It has to be that way. Correct? Thanks for watching.